there's a lot of private for-profit companies who are looking at using EVs in their fleet. And those companies only do that largely because it makes financial sense to do it. It's just a smarter move. So, I've heard talk of electric vehicles from certain companies reaching cost parity, like the same price without incentives as diesel variants. And that's in like a very short period of time. So as soon as that starts to happen, and with the operating costs being quite a bit lower, I think it's just going to be kind of an avalanche, and you're going to really see this stuff start to take over in the U.S.
Hi, I'm Lauren Espin, and welcome to the Optimistic Outlook podcast. You've probably seen headlines about the future of electric vehicles. Is adoption slowing? Is momentum fading? Is the transition to electric transportation still on track? In this episode, we take a closer look at what's actually happening. Our guests will share a different perspective, one grounded in real-world deployment. And here's a bit of a preview. EV sales are continuing to grow. Charging networks are expanding. And across fleets, infrastructure, and operations, meaningful progress is underway, often out of view. From transit systems to private fleets, organizations across the U.S. are continuing to electrify, deploying vehicles, scaling charging infrastructure, and building the systems needed to support them. Joining us today are Adam Orth from Siemens. Adam leads the company's transition to electric vehicles. His work is accelerating progress toward a fully electric U.S. fleet by 2030. Joining Adam are Mike Finnern and John Heaton from WSP, a global engineering and professional services firm. WSP works with organizations like Siemens that are planning and deploying zero-emission fleets and the infrastructure that supports them. Together, they'll share what they're seeing firsthand when it comes to EVs and infrastructure, and what it really takes to move from ambition to implementation. Let's dive in.
Mike, there's a growing narrative that EV adoption is slowing or even stalling. From your perspective, how accurate is that, and what are people getting wrong?
Geopolitical topics can shift things so quickly. Certainly that was the narrative a couple of months ago, and then some things have happened since then. The price that people are paying at the pump for gasoline has gone up quite considerably, and now all of a sudden you can find articles about the increase in interest in EVs. But the facts, as I see them, are, as a matter of fact, development has been continuing. I mean, there's more publicly available charge points than there ever has been in the past, and the growth of that continues to go up exponentially. At the rate at which they're added. Battery technology continues to get better and cheaper really quickly. So that's going to be a huge enabler, of increased adoption as we move forward. We're on third and fourth generation designs for the vehicles that are on the road now. And that's all happened in a very short period of time. So if people had an opinion about a particular product, or whether it worked for them, even just 2 years ago, 18 months ago, honestly, it may be that the technology has moved on enough since then that issues they may have been aware of have been resolved, or capability has been increased, or there's more charge points available, whatever it might be, right? So as a matter of fact, I think it's actually moving forward quite quickly. And if you could look beyond some of the articles that you might see online, you'll actually realize that.
John, WSP has a broad view across transportation systems. What are some of the most important developments, whether in charging infrastructure, fleet adoption, or technology, that people might actually not be aware of?
Something that we're seeing with our clients is just looking at the transition from a different lens. And so we have a client who is very committed to transitioning by 2030. They made a commitment in 2019, and they are full steam ahead, and they're not stopping. In fact, they're, doubling down. They're, installing employee chargers. They're actually in talks with Rivian to build out like a shuttle for employees. And so that's really exciting, because what Amazon did is invested in Rivian and basically was like, hey, we would like you to do this product. And then now its applicability is growing beyond, moving of goods and services, but into actually transporting people. And something else we're seeing is that clients are less willing to absorb all of the capital expenditures. They don't want to own all of the infrastructure. In fact, they're looking at charging as a service. So charging as a service allows for our clients to, expend operational expenditures and have sort of a subscription-based fee, but then allows for another, company to own, maintain, and basically run the charging system. And it allows for the client to sort of like not have to worry about all of those CapEx costs. So V2G, V2X, people are wanting to have a product that, in the event of their lights going off in their house, they don't have to have a generator. They can just plug their truck into the wall and have that feedback and power their home in the event of an emergency. So with that, Adam, I'd love to see and hear about how this played out at Siemens. I know you're halfway through the transition. What lessons learned have you experienced? What growing pains and how are things going on your end?
We have significantly ramped up in a very short amount of time to being electric only, especially within our service organization. We went into the field, figured out what the next vehicle needed to be by asking the actual user, the consumer, to say, okay, what should the vehicle have? What did it have before that you actually don't need anymore? And having the actual users as a part of helping us not only create the upfitting for the next vehicle, but also proving out the thoughts and the concepts along the way to say, yes, this is the vehicle. This is how we'll use it. These are the drivers that will have the ability to have it and use it. And it works for their use case. But to that point, with that comes a dramatic change in how we operate. It's an industry that historically operated on large cargo vans and large pickups and small cargo vans that have been around for eternity. That said, that huge operational shift, and in many ways, if you've never been in an EV before, it's relearning how to do your job. Like when you get up in the morning and you're used to going to the gas station and getting gas and getting your coffee and having a whatever part of your routine, giving them what is now a spaceship with phenomenal technology and giving them a home charger to start their day with that full tank of gas and the ability to start their day completely different from what they had for many, many years. You've got a newer generation that are all about it, know exactly day one how they want to go about their day. They're going to ask the Google Assistant where to charge during the middle of the day. But there's also a great group of staff that we've had for a while. And it is a significant shift for them to go from many years in a small van or many years in a large van to now a fully electric Silverado or a fully electric Equinox, which internally, externally looks different, feels different, drives different. But that in itself makes for more change. So the change management piece is significant, but the more we involve the people, the more we involve the voice of the actual user, the better you have for success and honestly for the enjoyment of the process of, holy cow, I get this new charger, I get a new EV, I get a new work day, if you will. And to that point, it becomes a new adventure and a new daily approach to your roles. Mike, you've worked on zero-emission fleet deployments for years. What are you seeing regarding EV adoption and charging infrastructure scaling today?
If you talk about buses in Europe or Asia or big cities in South America, basically battery electric is the default. I mean, the take rate on battery buses in the rest of the world, 2025 was something like 50% in Europe. Some countries that are like, Norway and the Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands, they're like 80%. All new buses are battery electric. That's also true for other segments of vehicles throughout the world. Passenger cars in the rest of the world are a pretty significant percent now of electric, higher than the U.S. It's maybe 20-30%, or even higher in certain countries in Europe. China's very high. Like, so the so-called flywheel of progress and production, so development and manufacturing is spooled up in a lot of places in the rest of the world. And so all you have to do is look there to kind of see what's happening in this segment. And those segments wouldn't be converting if it didn't make sense to do it, right? They're not doing it just because someone's telling them to do it. They're doing it because it's a better product, and in so many different ways, right? It does the work that they need for that vehicle to do in a better way. Costs less, it's quieter, it's smoother, less maintenance, etc. Lasts longer. All those things that are really important for folks who are just looking at the bottom line. And there's a lot of private for-profit companies who are looking at using EVs in their fleet, deploying electric fleet vehicles. And those companies only do that largely because it makes financial sense to do it. It's just a smarter move. So, I've heard talk of medium-duty electric vehicles from certain companies reaching cost parity, like the same price without incentives as diesel variants. And that's in like a very short period of time. So as soon as that starts to happen, and with the operating costs being quite a bit lower, I think it's just going to be kind of an avalanche, and you're going to really see this stuff start to take over in the U.S. And there's something like this is maybe a stat that's 6 months old, but there's like 30,000 of Amazon Rivian delivery vehicles on the road, right? They're everywhere now. And that happened in a pretty short period of time, right? There wouldn't be 30,000 plus if it didn't work. That's a lot. So
Exactly.
It's happening.
Yeah, I was in Munich 2 weeks ago, and saw several Rivian vehicles, and that in itself, not only to see them in your neighborhood, but then to go to Europe and see them doing an extremely similar job. To your point, it's companies like that moving the needle.
And I actually was working on a car of mine the other day on the engine, and I had the parts, a lot of the whole cylinder, had a lot of the parts to the engine spread out on my workbench. And I got to thinking, I'm like, holy cow, if you brought someone in that didn't know anything about cars today, internal combustion, you compared all those incredibly precisely engineered and manufactured components that are, at the end of the day, really inexpensive and reliable, relatively speaking. And you compared it to an electric vehicle, and a person that didn't know anything different would say, obviously, the best choice is this electric vehicle, right? So, as the flywheel of development and manufacturing continues to spool up, all the things that make that internal combustion engine fairly inexpensive and quite reliable are only going to make the EV 10 times more so, right? The same things will take over on that.
Well, and Mike, you've described but as a transition, in general, doesn't happen overnight. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that are out there about how quickly fleets can realistically electrify? Because back to my comment, it has to be an initiative. It has to be a group effort. What are you seeing that there's probably numerous approaches that you've dealt with where people are starting on the wrong foot?
Been working on electrifying fleets now for 16 plus years, and I've been involved in probably 140 plus individual fleet deployments. So I've learned a lot about what works, certainly learned a lot about what doesn't work. When you're first you're first kind of investigating this and first looking into it, you oftentimes will model, sort of the worst case scenario, the corners of the envelope. What happens when it's 20 degrees below zero? And, you start to model those elements where, yes, eventually you're going to want to have to tackle those scenarios, right? But I think oftentimes what's happened is because of the way we model this initially and because of the way we approach it, oftentimes with fleet vehicles where it has to be like almost an all or nothing kind of thing, we miss the fact that you could deploy these as is in a much less expensive, much faster, and more effective way if you just kind of focus in on certain elements of your fleet, for example, right? You don't need to do all of it at once. You can't do all of it at once. It's not possible. And why would you want your analysis to comprehend that straight out of the gate? Why not look at something that's a little bit more realistic, and clearly within the capability of everything that's available today first? So that's really what I recommend now, and I think that's something that WSP as a company, we help a lot of customers do this, and I think we've gotten better about that too, right? Helping to make sure that the analysis and the approach, fits the application in sort of the sweet spot, and we don't necessarily tackle the ends of the curve just yet. Ultimately, we'll want to, but we don't need to do that now. So that's an important element of this. And then, so that's sort of one end, and closely related to that, something that we really work with our customers on is don't treat these things as something as super special, right? It's just a vehicle, and it's got some things that you need to learn, just like any vehicle does. You need to have someone plug it in, separate from filling it with gasoline or diesel or something like that, right? There's some operational elements that are different, but at the end of the day, it's just a vehicle. And what we'll find from customers, if they just treat it like a regular vehicle, they get much more use out of it than if they were to be separated out and really treat it as sort of a special sub-fleet or something that requires extra special considerations, right? Just put it in the fleet and let it rip. I think you'd be surprised at how much you can get out of these vehicles.
People anticipate the fact that they're waiting for the light switch moment of, oh, hey, that's our day, whatever that day of that year that we're going to light switch and everything's going to be electric and we're well on our journey. And neat to see that you guys are having those conversations to get that reality check up front and assist people in that manner. To that point, John, we often hear, that it isn't just about vehicles, it's about infrastructure, energy, data, operations. How do you think that, electrification as a system, it's not just a technology shift?
We work with transit clients where they've had to really understand that it's a paradigm shift, that they are using one type of fuel that comes, either in a tanker and is put underground for storage. And they're switching to where the energy that keeps the lights on in their maintenance space and in their facility is now their new fuel provider and fuel source. And so it's quite a paradigm shift for agencies to understand how this new ecosystem is, and something that we really impart on our clients is to engage with utilities early on in the process, because oftentimes systems need to be upgraded. In the case of one of our clients, to fully electrify their bus depot, they need a primary level of service from the utility. And so those upgrades can take 3 to 5 years. And so when we're in this planning environment, we're thinking 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. And it's really, I think, vital for organizations to understand that this is a long game, that kind of throwing in some chargers, like kind of those early adopters where they just kind of threw out electric buses on routes and installed some chargers, that a lot of those early adopters had barriers, with that sort of initial run of the technology. And now we're seeing how, there's 20 to 1 dispensers now. There's AI companies that are coming in to solve for charge management solutions. And so there really are a lot more players in the field, especially, software as a service, management, data management, feeding sort of massive amounts of data back to the end user in a tablet form on an app where they can get a very good read of where their buses are, how, what's their state of charge, how much juice is left in each bus, and really providing, a user experience that allows for operations to be more streamlined. It also just requires agencies to really reconsider how they've always done things. And I think humans have a resistance to change, and things can feel scary and the technology's new, but then once, things are up and running and they're sort of experiencing the fact that they're not having to do so many tasks manually, that things are automated. And especially like we have a group here at WSP that's done an autonomous bus yard. So that's actually in development and its pilot stage. And so what that does is the buses, once they reach the depot, are able to park themselves, and they're actually able to generate basically a much tighter spatial configuration than, human operators. And that's allowing for, we work with clients in spatially constrained like locations like LA, San Francisco, where they have to park so many vehicles in a tight space. And if you automate that process, it allows for, bus stacking and then charging coming down from pantographs. And it really sort of is a new, entirely new system. And it requires a lot less labor costs in that regard, with hustlers and, people having to navigate really intricate spatial constraints. And so what we in part on our clients is just to be a part of that long game, that it is a long game strategy. And I think something that we are unaware of, especially now, as there's like that Donald Rumsfeld quote from back in the 2000s where like the unknown unknowns. And so we are attempting to plan for 2050 with 2026 knowledge. And so we're not really aware of the technological shifts. And I believe that there will be, paradigm shifts with solid state batteries, with automation and these newer technologies in the next 10 years that we can't even envision right now. And so, yes, people say, oh, there's going to be constraint on the grid. But then when we have someone on our team who does a microgrid tool where we integrate solar voltaic and battery storage systems. And that allows for sort of these like ecosystems, self-contained units, where you're not just drawing all that energy from the grid, because the grid is going to be more challenged, with the AI coming on board, and we're going to have to be thinking a bit outside the box. I think we, as service providers and as subject matter experts, we can really help our clients to begin that transition, to begin the conversations with the utilities, and to have that, long game in mind.
Initially going in this, many of us, myself included on the journey, it was an immediate thought of, one for one, charger to vehicle. But it's taken progress and taken, fleets and people doing to figure out, hey, that isn't the best approach. We don't actually have to do that. Oh, and by the way, we're going to tell other people like they don't have to do it in a similar fashion. The other point that you made regarding it being an ecosystem, I agree, is a critical piece. Even ahead of EVs and electrification, there was already, technology alone was advancing the taxation on the grid. It wasn't the oncoming of EVs that was to make the shift. We already were in a spot where it's like, hey, okay, how do we create a better ecosystem? And even back from a Siemens aspect, like I have what is a smart vehicle going to a smart building, and possibly servicing a smart data center. Like all of that in itself makes it truly an ecosystem management versus to Mike's point, a car or a this or a that. Mike, you've emphasized that workforce readiness and change management are just as important as technology itself. What have you learned about helping people get comfortable with this transition?
I used to call it a three-legged stool. You got to have the vehicles and the technology. You got to have a charging infrastructure, which has gotten so much better very quickly. The equipment has gotten to the point now where it's really very good. And it wasn't always the case just a few years ago. The third leg is the people. It's just as important as the first two. You have to have people and knowledge and training and workforce development built up for it to be successful. I've seen it time and time again. If you treated it as that element just as important as all the rest, you'd have a successful deployment. If you didn't, you might have a successful deployment or you might not. And that's because it would address their fears and help them feel more comfortable with whatever it is that is going to be changing. How their day-to-day lives are going to be changing by new vehicles or new tasks, as it were. So you can't put too much emphasis on this, like education, outreach to your employees, talk about it, make sure you engage them as stakeholders, elements of the organization that wouldn't perhaps been included in the past. They've got to be there. Got to give people the knowledge about what's going on, let them ask questions, get experts in front of them to answer those questions, to help make sure that it's successful.
Going back to the third leg, as we've worked with our clients, especially in the public sphere, their operators, their maintenance techs, a lot of them are aging out or hitting the point of retirement. And so how do we train the workforce of tomorrow on these advanced technologies? And we did a very in-depth workforce development training with our client in upstate New York, and got them to think about how they can sort of create a pipeline for emerging professionals. And, there's tech schools and trade programs, community colleges that have 2-year programs in advanced propulsion technologies and zero emission maintenance, zero emission, operations. And as you can see today, if you bring your car in to be serviced, it's a computer system, and they usually get out the diagnostic, systems, and they run tests, and it's a very similar vein with in the transit and medium and heavy duty space. And so we're really seeing an opportunity for training the next generation, green jobs, creating pipelines for employment, in an area where there's a lot of fear around AI taking jobs of young people, and how to differentiate themselves. And there's a very tight labor market these days. And so it's almost, I think, for young folks that are coming out of high school, there's people are questioning the value of a college degree, and whether or not it's worth it. And what I would impart on them is to, these technical skills and, trade knowledge are invaluable. And by going and getting a degree in advanced technologies, it sets you up for, to get into your foot in the door, and then you can grow within that industry as things progress.
John, as we look ahead, let's hear your optimistic outlook. What gives you the confidence that this transition will continue to accelerate, and we'll keep having conversations about the next neat thing, and what you're working on is transitioning to something even greater?
I just got back from Brazil. I was in Sao Paulo and saw electric buses operating on their BRT routes, and it invigorated. It was a manufacturer too that doesn't operate or build buses here in the U.S. And it made me excited that this is happening around the world, that actually developing markets. I was in India last year and saw Tata e-buses on the streets of New Delhi. That this is happening, and especially in, countries like that are emerging in this century, Brazil, India, Indonesia. Like look at VinFast in Southeast Asia. I mean, there's really a lot of it's ample, it's ripe, and an amazing time for these developing nations to really leapfrog.
I was on an electric bus in the Netherlands a few months ago. Same thing. You're not only looking at it and obviously sitting down, but you're looking at it as a part of how it's operating and looking at all the aspects of the ecosystem while you're riding in it, going, I wonder how this would fit in city, A, B, C, or D, or someone else's commute, across the globe. And Mike, I will close with you. To people hearing this who want to take action and actually advance EV adoption within a corporate environment, what advice do you have for them?
As a recommendation, you need to get experts to help because it is relatively complex. Maybe having a few here and there, you can manage that. But when you're talking about a corporate fleet, where it's perhaps a sizable fleet, it's not one size fits all, and you got to look at a lot of elements, and you can't expect maybe internal folks to be an expert on everything, especially because it's changing so fast. So I think what oftentimes you'll find is there are good solutions to what you actually need versus what you just have been doing in the past because that's the way you've been doing it, right? So be open to kind of reevaluating it, and so it just makes a good opportunity to look at your operation as a whole, so to speak, and to optimize it in many ways, electrification just being one of them. So that's kind of my advice. But again, it's happening, so get ready and get started working on it.
Agree. And I love being in this space right now. I often tell my internal fleet team, in 6 months from now, you could end up being an expert on something that hasn't even crossed your desk today. And suddenly it's a part of the ecosystem that you have to solve for. On that note, I would like to thank you both for joining the podcast. Greatly appreciate not only your expertise, but your time as well. So thank you both.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks so much. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Optimistic Outlook. Be sure to tune in for more conversations with leaders shaping technology for a better tomorrow. Please subscribe to The Optimistic Outlook wherever you listen to your podcasts, and be sure to share the podcast with a friend or colleague.